Higher and upward. And I just got to be honest with that. I joke a lot. And those jokes are they're the truth. They're real. I'd go to BSM by the free lunch. How many of y'all do the free lunch thing? We're going to be serving y'all in a couple of weeks. Y'all got to go get your free lunches at BSM. All right. I see you. So we'd go there and he would we'd been introduced. And he'd asked me out and I had stood him up a couple times. So I guess he was salty a bit. But he would be like, oh, do the sorority girls come from on high to mingle with the commoners? And I'd be like, is that how you win people to Jesus? By all the love that you exude when they show up? And we were both kind of like, whatever, dude. But that's how our relationship built. But at the beginning, he was the only one who would call me not to live with one foot on both sides of the world. And it ticked me off. It was hard. Right? But he was the only one in my life calling me upward and higher and challenging me to be more of who God created me to be. And when it got deeper in our relationship and it got to be a little more, John was a youth pastor out at Lingoville. And I was saved, but if I am honest, I was not living like it. Right? I was some of the reasons we kind of talked about it today at Grow Time at Cold Smoke of people saying, I've got these friends that come and their excuse for coming to T-Rock is I see the same people there as living with it. And I was that hit me. I felt that because I was probably one of those people that they're yeah, they're just showing up at Bible study, but their life doesn't look like it at any other time. And I was just on my faith journey. I have no excuse for it, but I definitely wasn't drawing people into something that looked real and authentic. I probably looked as much like the world, if I'm honest, as the other, and John didn't. And I will be honest with you. Again, we weren't perfect, and it got awkward sometimes. After we were dating, there were just on the for real, there were times when we were engaged that we were not keeping good boundaries, and he would stop, and he'd be like, we need to stop this. We need to pray. And I'm like, no? Right now we need to pray? He's like, yeah, we need to pray. And I'm like, oh, okay. It's awkward. It got awkward. It was not easy to keep those boundaries, but we were both striving for Jesus. And I'm going to tell you two things that we said. I think we were already engaged, in the James and Lauren stage, when we started saying some of the things that matter today. They matter a lot, because I'm not saying that we were perfect by any means, but we both loved Jesus. And I knew that if I wanted a relationship that honored God, and if I was real with myself, the reason I was standing John up was because I knew that it was game over if I would surrender. And I was scared, man. I had some baggage and some trust issues. But also, I was having a lot of fun, I thought. Right? The Bible says some things. There's this book, it's Solomon. King Solomon says, fun is good for a season, but it left me empty. I know I was saved because when I laid my head down at night, that pillow talk was harsh. And that's conviction. That just proves I had the Holy Spirit. But it wasn't easy. I knew that I was wrestling. But if I'm honest, here's what I loved about John. I love to see y'all worship. I love freedom in worship. It took a long time for us to just get free. And living 7 years in Haiti will do that for you, because nobody cares about what the person to the left or right thinks about you. They want to get before the throne and not have to hear God say, not only good and faithful servant, but hey, why'd you care more about what someone to the left or the right thought of you when face to face before me, it was me that mattered? They aren't here now. They aren't here next to you. It's going to be you on your face before him directly. And I learned that in Haiti. But in that journey, I thought John was so cool, because this 6'4" guy would be at the BSM. It was the 90s, so we didn't have worship music like y'all do today. And we would sing this song, what a mighty God we serve. What a mighty God we serve. And I'd stand back there with my sisters, watching, and I'm crazy. Like, I wanted to be up there with him, but that just kind of, I had some insecurities too. But John would be up there like, angels bow before him, heaven and earth adore him. He didn't give a rip, and I found that so attractive. It was so hot. But I want to tell you two things about striving to honor God, and when we got into that place. One thing that I said to John, in the 90s, there was this movie out called Jerry Maguire. Any of y'all seen it? Or it's just like too old? We're too old. So there's this line in there that all the other girls that are like good at being girls, which isn't me, would like swoon. I remember literally being in the movie theater, and there's this line that he says, "You complete me." And you heard this, oh, and I was like, he don't complete me. He makes an awful God. Like, Jesus complete me, and everything after is going to be an overflow. We thinking the life out of each other to be each other's God. Like, I don't know. That didn't fly for me. And I told John all the time, I want you and I choose you like God chose us while we were yet sinners. I don't need you. I'm okay without you. Me and Jesus are just fine. And he acted like he really loved that. He told me today, like, that was like, he's told me since that and today, like, that was super intimidating. And I knew that you were right, but like, that was also like, man. But what John would tell me, which was also really hard for me, he would say, hey, if I put you before Jesus and you become an idol for me, like, I just want you to know now he's my first love and this ain't going to work out. And I thought that was really hot too, except I had no control of if he was going to put me and our relationship before God as an idol. It's hard not to be able to control, right? Not to have a little hook, a little manipulation, right? Use a little of what my mama gave me. And it just wasn't going to work with John because his first priority was God. I'm going to tell you right now, 25 years later, we just got back from celebrating it. John and I are not good enough spouses to keep one another in the game and be winning. We're not. We work at it, but more importantly, we cling to Jesus. It takes a lot of work. It's worth the work because we believe that relationships are given to us to model here in a broken, fallen world what love is supposed to look like, and we have messed it up. Amen. We've messed it up. We keep his love our first priority. So right at the beginning, Genesis 2:18. Oh, we're going to get there. We're going to get there. Why don't we? Let's go back one. Yeah, right at the beginning. What's at the center? What holds the relationship together? Genesis 2:18 says, the Lord said it's not good for the man to be alone. I'm going to make a helper suitable for him. This verse shows that God created humans to be together for companionship, love, friendship, partnership, and relationship. And let me tell you, when you don't call something or label something what it actually is, what ends up happening is that standards are lowered to meet your wants and not trusting God for your needs. And your expectations become really skewed. God's expectations for you, your expectations for the relationship, their expectations. We got to call it what it is. Not calling it what it is, I don't know why, but I was sitting in the office going over these notes and I was like, Chase, what's like a generic version of something? Because it's trading this valuable, one-of-the-kind, unique thing that God has called us to for something that cheapens it. And he's like, great value. And I was like, oh yeah, it's like great value. I really like ranch. So I'm like, it's like the great value version of Hidden Valley. And then I was like, no, I better say like Dr. Pepper or Coke, because when you go to that party and they don't really have Dr. Pepper, they have like, what? Dr. Thunder. Yeah. And you're like, I mean, it's almost, I know everybody's out there, like keeping it 100, and you're like, yeah, you're rolling at about 80 there. But let's look at why don't we? Why don't we want this genuine, valuable gift of what relationships are supposed to be? We can go there. I want to tell you, I was right in the middle of this, and for me, as a counselor, Like this was the professional side, and Jesus is in me inside and out. So I'm not going to say like it didn't come with the Bible, but I know I see it every day. I'll tell you the first and the second to last is what I had on the sheet. We don't define the relationship first because we got trust issues. We are in a whole generation that a lot of us haven't seen our parents live that out in a way that was committed and faithful and looked healthy, right? And so we're living in that. And so those trust issues have us have plan B, right? Like if it doesn't work out, I have all of these. And the other answer that I put up there was fear. And I'll get there because we all have these core fears, and God didn't give us a spirit of fear. Perfect love casts out all fear. That's God's words, not mine. But those are the ones that I had. And then my daughter, who's in grad school, who not that long ago was on this stage and right where y'all are, she called and she's like, "What you doing, Mom?" And I was like, "Well, you can pray for me for tomorrow night. I'm bringing a word on relationships." And I was like, "So why don't you think?" And she had a word. I was like, "Okay, preach." I was like, "Why don't you think that y'all define relationships?" And I'll go into what she said. But we have trust issues. We say like, well, if it doesn't work, I have all of these, right? And we're talking about those social media, like comfort DMs that we'll say like when we get found out, like they don't mean anything. Like then why are you keeping them in the lineup, right? But that is not real. Like that is not the person sitting next to you, investing in you. That is you trying to find comfort because it's hard for you to trust. And if you don't trust, ultimately it's a trust issue this way. But she said her straight up answers were, "Mom, we just depersonalize one another." And I was like, okay, what do you like? I get that. And she was like, because we're swiping left. And then she's like, "You want me to preach?" And I was like, "Preach." And she said, "People aren't commodities, people are creations." People are not commodities. They are creations, and we act like it's just another name. It's another app hookup. We forget that we are created in the image of God, and as image bearers, there's a worth and a value there that make us more than just the next DM, the next booty call, the next situationship. And then she said, and then she just kept on. And I'm like, she said, it's just our access to people, followers, online reactions, that we are trading comparison, comparing ourselves, and we're letting those things, just as Taylor said, identify us. And in that, the access to people, our followers, where we're getting some of those needs met, is just keeping doors open that would otherwise be closed, right? Like I'm not saying like we didn't have social media. I know it's hard. Like we didn't have the problems that y'all have. Like we had MySpace. But like back then, MySpace, it was more like just a profile page. And then I think you could like say if you were in the relationship. But back then it was like cool, like not like what y'all are battling with today. And we're going to go there and look at a really cool relationship in the Word that does that. But with all of that, y'all keep doors open that God never intended to stay open through commitment and faithfulness. So you think that your dating pool is bigger than it actually is. Hey, I got something I just got to tell you. I'm not saying it's all bad or all good, right? We don't do this pendulum swing of that. There's nothing that's all bad or all good. God's usually in the balance. Balance and boundaries is healthy. But I will tell you this. Social media is not real. I know that's everything you read on the internet's not facts. I get to sit with people, and I will tell you, like, some of the hardest parts about my job is that, what I get to see, and it's confidential, right? These are HIPAA rights, like your medical record rights. And people will be going at it, or someone will be like broken telling me their stuff. I kid you not, like they'll leave and I'm writing my notes and I'm praying for them. And then I go home that night and I'll even look at the timestamps. I'm like, That's like 30 minutes after they left my office. And they'll like, perfect life. Oh my gosh, best husband ever. I'm like, that is not what you were saying. That is not what was going on in my office. And then I'll get another person say, everybody's life's so perfect, but mine. I'm like, that ain't true. Don't believe that. But I can't say anything, and it gets real weird for me. But social media is not real. And the other one that I had is fear, right? That's the other reason why we don't define the relationship. Fear of rejection. We have commitment issues. Maybe that does go on with trust, but a lot of what we struggle with launch from some core fears. And that's the reason God speaks to it and says, I didn't give you that spirit. That fear is not of me. Perfect love casts out all fear. And so that's the reason. Another cool thing that my really smart kid said was ambiguity feels safer. That's a really like $2 word, right? But I'm paying for it in medical school, so I wanted to use it. Ambiguity feels safer. What a lie. But we convince ourselves of that, right? Like if I don't tell myself this is or isn't what I think it is, then when I realize that it isn't, and we've just been friends with benefits, and then they drop me when the real thing comes along and I feel like a cheap piece of trash, I told myself that would be easier and wouldn't hurt, but it feels safer. That's why we don't live by feelings, right? We live by faith. And so we're going to look at a word that takes all that emotional selfishness, all the immaturity of some of what culture says is normal, and look at why we make it difficult, even hard, to have committed, God-honoring, healthy relationships. Because sometimes we just want to have our cake and eat it too, right? When it's accessible to us. So there's a book in the Old Testament. It's Ruth. And I'm going to break it down pretty easy into the chapters. But it's a book of Ruth. And right from the beginning, in chapter 1, Ruth and the story defines her new identity. She's a Moabite, which in the Old Testament, means before Jesus came. That was a tribe that didn't honor God. They weren't God's people. And so she had a husband, and they weren't Israelites. Israelites were God's people. And her husband died. And she really loved her mother-in-law, Naomi. And she was really not only committed, I think sometimes we're like, oh, like she was really loyal and faithful to Naomi. But actually, she saw a life that she desired in the people of God. Like she was defining that relationship with God, and that was so attractive. She was like, no, where you go, I'm going to go, because your God is my God. And that's what we see that happening in chapter 1. She's defining this relationship and her faithfulness to God. And then in chapter 2, we see like her purpose in singleness and where God has her. And so she's with Naomi. And in chapter 2, it starts. I'm going to read it, but I've just summarized it up there. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth, the Moabite, said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. And they answered, the Lord bless you. And then Boaz said to this young man, who's in charge of these reapers? We all know how this goes, right? Who's that girl over there? But that's what's happening right now. He says, whose young woman is this? And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, she's a young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. And she said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came, and she continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. They're getting to know each other. He's seeing that she's a hard worker. We start off with Ruth starkly contrasting the pagan Moabite culture from which she originated and living different. And I think that matters because a lot of times we expect to get this when we're living like this. I will tell you, God is a gracious God. My story shouldn't be what it is. Some of those KDRs that I were dating back in the 90s, I don't even know if it was dating. I think it was friends with benefits. I don't know. But I'm just saying, I am just saying, I expected God for what I have today, but I had to make a choice, right? I had to make a choice to repent, to turn from how I was living and what I was doing. And that happened first with God before it could happen with John, because I had a guy in my life that I saw attributes getting to know that was, he said things to me, like he'd be like, you'd be pretty cool if you decide what side you're going to live on. And I don't know, it really made me mad at the time. It was so good for me now. So Ruth and Boaz, he's treating her special, and they've swiped left, and now they've like clicked right, and they're doing a little DMing. They go on this date, and Boaz says to Ruth, now listen, my daughter, do not go glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they're reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men? Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you're thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. And then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should notice me, since I'm a foreigner? But Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your husband and mother and your native land, and you came to the people that you didn't know before. The Lord is going to repay you for what you've done, and a full reward will be given to you from the God of Israel, under whose wings you've come to take refuge. And then she said, I found favor in your eyes, my Lord. And they're just doing some flirting in today's, going back and forth. For you have comforted me, and you spoke kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. So we are seeing this happen, right? This plays out. And this is their date, verse 14 and verse 2. And at the mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here, eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. So she sat beside the reapers, and she passed to her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. And when she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves. Do not reproach her. And also pull out some extra bundles for her and leave it for her to glean of. Don't rebuke her. So she gleaned from the main field until the evening, and then she beat out what she had gleaned, and she took it home to her mother-in-law. So she brought out what food, and then they start talking. And there's this time she's seeking Naomi, her mother-in-law's advice. We have verse 20, and Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness is not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours, one of the redeemers. And what that means is, back in the day, for women especially, when you'd lost your husband, like, you really needed some protection. And a redeemer is someone who could like redeem what you had lost, being without covering, as a widow. So he had the right to do that because she was now a part of Naomi's family, and he was in Naomi's family. So Naomi also said to her, so he's a close relative of ours, one of the redeemers. And so Ruth, the Moabite, said, besides, he said to me, you shall keep close by the young man until they have finished all my harvest. And this makes me laugh. She's getting this advice, and Naomi goes on to say, like, go do what he said. They're going back and forth about Boaz and his intentions. That's what's happening today. And I got back from my trip to Alaska, and I'm trying not to look at anybody here. And I had one of y'all in my life that was stressing, like all stressed about some things and going back for, I don't know if he means this. I'm about done with this, and he won't do this, and I don't even know about this. And I feel like that's what's happening here, right? Because he showed all this attention. He was super kind. They had their first date, and then she's just working in his field, but like there was like she's ghosted, right? There's a little bit. I want to take a moment here to talk about your cancel culture, right? Yeah. Um, this is what I love about Naomi. She's like, well, I mean, he is this person. He has a possibility of this, but hey, he told you to do that. So just go doing what you're doing, because she's like, you could be assaulted by other people. And Naomi's like, okay, right. And she's still like wrestling back and forth about these things, and we'll see where it goes from there. But guys, y'all get mad, right? And because y'all haven't sometimes been taught to conflict well, we're going to mess with each other a little bit. And y'all know now it's kind of a normal thing about gaslighting. And so y'all have got manipulative ways to try to control the relationship to get the other one to do what you want them to. So I'm going to leave them on red. I saw that text right when it came through, but I'm going to wait a while because I don't want to seem too thirsty. And so what are y'all doing? Playing games. I mean, for real. And I'm not saying Boaz was playing games. The Bible doesn't really let us know what was happening there. I don't know if he was scared, if he was trying to really see what Naomi was about. Maybe he was just busy. I mean, he had a lot to oversee, right, of these fields that she was working. But Ruth is confused. She felt they had a connection. Then there's nothing. He friend zoned her. And so Naomi starts challenging her to get honest, answering questions like, what are we? Are we just friends? Are we exclusive? Do we go public on social media? Ruth is speaking wisdom and mentorship. And what I love about Naomi is she was like, this is the time you got to DTR. You've got to define what this relationship is. And we see in chapter 3, Naomi tells Ruth some things. She said, should I not seek rest for you? Like, it's time. It's time for you to stop wrestling with this, that it may be well with you. Is not Boaz our relative with whose young women you were? And I was talking with this person, one of y'all, and I was like, oh my gosh, has he not done this? Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, kind of, but I'm still irritated with this, and this. And I was like, well, that's not fair. Are you mad at him or are you mad at yourself? Because you won't just straight up ask him. So she says, see, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. So when they would come into harvest and they picked what they had at the end, there was like a night of harvest, and it was a party. It was the finished of harvest, and it's also payday. So sometimes after a win of a football game, there's a celebration, right? Like that's what they were doing. So Ruth had worked day after day in the fields, and Naomi's like, hey, tonight put a little effort into it, because I mean, Boaz has saw her at her ick, right? Like, I mean, she's like, give some effort and go. And he tells her to do some weird things. But I want you to know, I'm picking on the person who I love very, very much. But Naomi's telling Ruth these things, and it's hard. It's a risk. Do y'all feel that? Like when you want to define the relationship and get some things, we talked about all those reasons. Those are funny to read on a slide, but they're real. Like we feel them. We're carrying some of that baggage and weight into this thing that we may desire. Can I tell you how hard it is in your culture? And I'm going to bring up culture here because there's some weird things that happen in this interaction between what Naomi tells Ruth to do, and it's just culture. It's part of the culture of that day. And we have some culture happening today that makes it really hard for y'all to live out what God wants for you and your life. And so we're going to talk about some of those cultures. But I literally, especially last year when I was seeing, and I'm not picking on you, I mean, but when I was seeing a ton of rodeo students, I don't know why, but not this last year, but the year before that, the NFR came, and I like everybody either had to telehealth or not be there. And I one day it was like, I'm a rodeo therapist. I don't know. That's shifted, and I have a lot of athletes and various people now. But in that time, I literally had guys come sit in my office and on my couch, and I'm like, okay, tell me a little bit about what brought you in here, right? What are some goals? What do you hope to get out of counseling? And this is how hard it is for you. This is how confused you are and how much you've traded the truth for a lie. They would be like, well, I've caught feelings for this girl. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, but it's just like a hookup thing. You're in a therapist's office because you feel less than a man and like something's wrong with you and you're weak because you care about someone and want to date them in the light of day instead of just keep booty calling at night? Okay, yeah, let's talk about that. And he's like, yeah, because it's a thing. We're just a hookup, nobody even knows, but we're actually really close. We've actually probably been doing this for a while now, and I've caught feelings. I'm like, yeah, because intimacy is bonding. That's what naturally happens, man. I get the reason that y'all are confused about how some of this is supposed to go down. But Ruth took bold initiative, and she listened to Naomi. We're going to look at that in chapter 3. I want to tell you guys, if God is in it, it is worth it. It's worth the risk. That's part of what faith is and what it does for us. And so we're going to just jump to verse 6. So she being Ruth, she went down to the threshing floor, and she did as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and his heart was merry, he laid down there at the end of the heap of grain. And when she came softly and uncovered his feet and laid down. I know that's really weird. We aren't going to go down, and when we want to let someone know that we might have feelings for them, and we're not going to go sit at his feet and cover a part of us with his blanket. That's just not what we do. I don't allow my kids to use the same blanket, especially if they're watching Netflix. But back in the day, right? Back in the day, they had some weird customs. Like today, we have some weird customs. Hookup culture, it's a weird custom, right? So I want y'all to see some of the things they were doing then, and let's get real about it. She had integrity and honored God first with those customs. She was submissive to herself and laid herself at the end of his feet, and she took the blanket and put some honor to be like, hey, I want to share this with you. She didn't get up all in there in that blanket and think that she had to be desperate enough to give him everything so that he would love her and want her. That's not what she did. Right? Think about it. She didn't play the friends with benefits to see if he wanted some more of that. So she, at midnight, verse 8, the man was startled and he turned over. Behold, a woman was laying at his feet. And he said, who are you? I feel like this story goes a whole different way at a lot of frat parties. Who are you? I mean, Jesus knows. And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you're a redeemer. And he said, it went well for her, right? She took that bold step of taking that risk. And he said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this kindness greater than the first, in that you've not gone after other young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, don't fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you're a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am your redeemer, and yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. We're going to stop there for a minute because we're talking about some stuff. When we wait and commitments are never made, potential for misunderstanding and conflict, being upset and unfulfilled is going to happen, right? When we're waiting and we let ourselves get kind of used to the situationship, a relationship without a relationship, the no strings attached, but that is not true. So often there's a whole lot of strings attached. We're not living in the truth. My job, like really as a counselor, as a therapist, is to help people live in reality. Because we so often, out of like survival mode, we will build a false narrative that works to make us feel better. And a lot of times I'll say something like, someone who's really broken, we all need a safe place to be broken without fear of being destroyed. And when they're kind of done, I'll say, do you even believe what you're saying anymore? Who are you really lying to? Like, are you lying to social media who thinks you're single when you're like really not? Or are you lying to yourself because you're scared? In the DTR, risk is involved. Rejection's a possibility, but it's better knowing than not knowing, or assuming something, or not wanting to be honest with the other one, or the other putting in all of the effort for the relationship. We're going to look at those weird customs, and I'm just going to read some scriptures over you and let God do with the hookup culture what God wants to do. Proverbs was a book of wisdom. It was written, inspired by God to David's son, who, when God says, like, what do you want? You can have anything you want. He's like, I want wisdom. Proverbs 7, 6 through 10. I'm just going to read these. I'm going to let them fall where they will, and I'm going to leave it at that. Proverbs 7, 6 through 10. At the window of my house, I looked down through the lattice, and I saw among the simple, I noticed among the men a youth who had no sense. He was going down the street near her corner, walking along in the direction of her house at twilight, as the day was fading. Booty call, he knew. As the dark of night set in, then out came a woman to meet him, dressed like a prostitute with crafty intent. Proverbs 7, 22 to 23. All at once he followed her like an ox going to slaughter, like a deer stepping into a noose. Verse 23, until an arrow pierces his liver, like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it's going to cost him everything. Think about it. So now we're in verse 12. He's like, and here's what I want to say before I finish this story, and we're almost done here, about Ruth and Boaz, is she DTRs. He's like, yeah, I got you. This is really cool. You did a thing, and I think you're really honorable, and I'm going to honor you. And we'll go at what he does, but there's a lot to say here. I'm going to read this, and then I'm going to do some explaining. So, chapter 3, verse 13, remain tonight, and in the morning, let's go 12, verse 12. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, and yet there's a redeemer nearer than I. He's got to speak some truth into some issues that are really there. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he'll redeem you, good, let him do it. And if he's not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I'm going to do it. Lie down until morning. They had some customs. There was a guy that was like, unfortunately, it's like kind of like property. And there was a guy that should inherit before him. But here's what I want to talk about. There's a lot there, because I also sit with a lot of people who are really struggling in where about Boaz and Ruth are about to go, where James and Lauren are about to go. When they get to the commitment, faithful marriage part, and then find out one or the other has a porn problem, that they were unwilling to share their struggles, that they kept because of shame, thinking, I'll get over it. This will make it better, but I'm not going to be honest, because if I'm honest with you, you might not love me. Right? Causes a lot more betrayal and confusion at the end. And so Ruth and Boaz are having this interaction, and he's like, but dude, we got some issues to take care of first. How many of y'all are pursuing a relationship and you haven't really taken care of your issues? You still have a lot that you got to work out yourself. But I don't know if I can be that transparent and vulnerable. So I'm going to go into this thing really hoping that it fixes some things. But we're not going to really be honest about what's going on with us. How many times do I say to some of y'all in this room, and a lot of times in my office when they're paying me to say it to them, yeah, I can tell you feel really strong about that. Have you told him? No, I'm not going to tell him that. I don't want to, I don't know. But like, that's how you really feel, and that's going to come out somewhere. So they get real with each other about some other issues, and they know they can't go here until they bring some darkness to light here. And a godly man took initiative to consider how the relationship is going to affect the family. There was a problem. They got real about the problem, but I love that he includes family. And I know a lot of y'all don't have a healthy family. I get it. And so your relationships, like, man, I don't want them to look like this, and this really isn't. But some of y'all think it's just old school stuff too. If you have a healthy family, I want to say two things and leave it there. As Boaz wanted to go and honor the family, because at the beginning, man, this is like God's people, God's way, before it gets all distorted. He goes and does some honorable family stuff. He does it right. He didn't get caught up in the emotion and do things that night he regrets. He's like, we got to go work some things out. But it is not too old school or old fashioned if you have a healthy, good family and you want to include your family. I love that when Lauren's family visits here, I think they love James as much as they love you more. And I really do think that my mom would have taken John over me. That was just the truth of it. Asking permission is honorable. Like, that girl was somebody else's before you started entertaining the idea of God's will for her to be yours. James, just out of curiosity, I may be shooting myself in the foot. Did you ask her dad for her hand in marriage? Look at you, Boaz. All right, James. So he was truthful, he was honest. And if a loving, godly relationship is going to be established, you need to deal directly with problems. I think you should include family. And the other thing I'm going to say about that is if you do have loving family and they're saying they see some red flags, listen, it might not be what you want, but I guarantee you're going to come back and be like, I know you were right, Mom. You know how many of my kids have said that? And it's so hard not to be like, I mean, I told you, but. So take appropriate initiative in defining the relationship. You're going to be at peace. There's going to be blessing and legacy. Boaz and Ruth go on to get married. In chapter 4, we see the redeeming. She knows and feels her worth. They know where they stand. That was clear. And then they go public. They didn't soft launch. They full out put it before everybody on social media. They went and announced it right away. They were sure about what God was doing, about what they felt for each other, and they entered into blessing to create a legacy that continued. And I don't know your story, and I don't know how it ends, but I do know that God has a plan for relationships and a plan for you. And I do know how often I sit with college students and young adults that are hurt and confused over things like friends with benefits. I'm going to end as we look at the story of Ruth, guys. I want to talk about friends with benefits. It's just another attempt to enjoy the benefits of God's gifts of sexuality without having to obey any of God's rules regarding sexuality. Okay, I'm going to read Genesis 2:24 and 25 as she comes up. Genesis 2, verse 24 and 25. Therefore, a man's going to leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. If you don't have to be around John and I a long time to know that when we talk about getting back to the garden before we messed it up, there is a lot of freedom about being able to be naked and feels no shame. So it doesn't just mean physically. It means being fully known and fully loved, being stripped of pride, this deep desire for something that only God can fulfill in you, and really sharing with another human that's your person, that journey, that faith journey. You can't share in God's perfect love without clear expectations, without serious emotional, mental, spiritual, and physical consequences. You can't share in God's perfect love without the clear expectations. without having serious emotional, mental, spiritual, and physical consequences. I can make more jokes and say, like, I really think sometimes, Tarleton, I'm an alma mater. My daughter's literally 4th generation graduate. But I think sometimes it should be like, there should be a shirt at Barefoot that was like TSU STD so we can see it coming. There are consequences, but I sit with the reality of some of those deep consequences that make us question a lot more, that causes stress and anxiety, leading to all kinds of depression and self-doubt. We trade the truth for a lie. Pray with me. Lord, may we have the courage